Today we reach the end of our series, To Be the Church. Don't just go to church, but be the church. This is the last sermon that will specifically be on this series, although we'll continue to talk about what this means to be the church in the future, just as we have followed up our previous study, Believe and See. Be the church. And so next week we are going to conclude this in a little different way. A way of being the church, a way of being seen. And that's to gather with others in Loosedale for a concert. And it's a day, much as we've looked previously at the festivals in the Bible, an opportunity to have a holy rest. A holy rest. We have to drive an hour and a half to get there, but it's a holy rest. When we get there, it'll be good, and we'll get to be the church. Not just Trinity, but the church. I have the question in the bulletin about what the points that we have. If you have a pen to write them down, this would be a good time to do that. As we've gone through the series, there's 5 points that we've talked about, all beginning with be. To be the church, first off, is to be honest. To be the church is to be honest, especially with God. Especially with God. Remember, the story was from Ananias and Sapphira. It wasn't that what they gave wasn't good enough. It was that they weren't honest about it to God. They said, "This is all." And Peter said, "God knows better." Be honest. Part of being the church means to be honest. Secondly, to be the church means to be courageous. To be courageous. To be like Paul. Paul, as he went into the Areopagus and amongst these people who didn't know, even have an idea about who this Christ was, to talk to them about that, to talk to the philosophers. And to not just say, here are some good ideas, you should pick some of them, to go along with their idea of syncretism, putting together the best of everything. Instead it was, you have to take all of it or none of it. All of it. You need to accept all of it. Be courageous. That's a tough thing to do sometimes. Thirdly is to be faithful. To be faithful. To be faithful in our actions. Remember, the story was of the parable of the 2 sons. The one who said the wrong thing but did the right thing, and the other who said the right thing but did the wrong thing. To be faithful. To be a good servant. To be a good son. To be a good child. To do what your Father would like. To be faithful. To be the church means to be faithful. Fourthly, to be the church means to be countercultural. To be the church means to be countercultural. Remember last week, we looked at the passage that said, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Do these things that seem to be so against what our culture teaches us. To be set apart. We are set apart. Remember, we talked about last week, the big word we talked about last week was sanctification. We'll continue to look at that word a little bit today. We are justified because of what Jesus Christ did. But we have the continuing, ongoing process of being sanctified or being made holy. Becoming more and more like Jesus every day. To aim for that perfection, as Paul says. To be countercultural, to be set apart. And fifthly, today, we're going to look at the idea. To be the church means to be visible. To be the church means to be visible. We look at our passage today in Luke chapter 8. Beginning in verse 16. We're just going to look at the first portion of this passage. No one lights a lamp and hides it in a jar or puts it under a bed. Instead, he puts it on a stand so that those who come in can see the light. This is one of Jesus' shortest parables, giving this idea idea of talking about what you would do with the light. What advantage would there be to putting a light underneath the bowl or under a stand? You only do that when you don't want people to know you're home, like turning off the light switch. It reminds me of a time that I was in Sicily with one of our kids, and we were in there, and this girl came in that she didn't particularly care for, and she slooped down in the bench. She said, "I don't want that girl to know I'm here. I don't want her to see me." We've all done something like that in the past, haven't we? We've seen somebody that we don't really want to see, or we don't want them to see us. Sometimes because they scare us, sometimes because we like them. I know that's kind of ironic. And sometimes because we owe them money, and we don't want to have to give them that money, or we don't have it. But the reason you would hide this light, you would hide it under a lamp or at a stand, it would just be if somebody was out there that you don't want to know you're home. You want them to just pass on by and think you're not there. I'll just wait till tomorrow to see him, or wait for another time. Said, but no, you put your lamp on the stand so that the light can shine in the whole room, and so that when people come in, they may be able to see all throughout the room. People may be able to see us. We need to be visible. As people in the church, we need to be seen. We need that light to shine forth. Another term in sanctification in the Old Testament, the idea of holiness, was a shining brightness. You remember when we talked about Moses coming down from the mountain after receiving the Ten Commandments. He glowed because he was in God's presence. That light was literal on Moses at that time. And there's been other people throughout the history of the Bible and of the church who people were able to say they saw a glow on them. Not all of them had to wear veils over their faces like Moses did, but had this literal light that came from that idea of holiness that came about from them. That idea that God had been with them and in their presence, and there was something special about them, or something special about their relationship with God. As we go about our days, and as we go about being the church, it's a very important thing as we go about each of these ideas, each of these B's, these 5 things. Being honest, being courageous, being faithful, being countercultural, and being visible. Sometimes when we're countercultural, we don't really want to be visible. We know, okay, God, you tell me to do this, but please don't let anybody see me do it. I want to do it in secret in order to be humble. That's it. That's why I want to do it. Some people say that just because they don't want to be seen. They don't want people to know what they're like. They don't want people to know who or whose they are, because we sometimes have this fear of man in us. We have this fear of man that we will be embarrassed. That's the biggest thing that I hear when asking about evangelism, about telling people about your faith, that courageous. In college, there was a friend of mine from Canada who was a football player on the Iowa State football team. And the leader asked the question, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about evangelism? And he said, fear. A football player from Canada playing Division I football was afraid to share his faith.